So, Jennifer, let's talk about your column. You're writing about the prospect of a government shutdown. The president, in that famous meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, said, "I'll take it. It'll be the Trump shutdown." Chuck Schumer kind of walked him into that trap, and the president was happy to be there. Is there a shutdown, do you think, when we hit Friday, when we hit the deadline? And if so, what are the implications for the president? Because there's no way out of it at this point, given the fact that he himself has said it is his shutdown.
Like the Fight Club, in the shutdown club, one does not say, "I am for the shutdown." That is rule one of the shutdown club. I think Republicans were stunned, frankly, when he said this. This is not something that they want. For those who are leaving, they want to leave. For those who are coming back, they know it looks terrible. You never win a shutdown. We've learned that twice in the last few years, once in 2013 when the Republicans tried to do it and did it, and once earlier this year when the Democrats did it over the issue of the Dreamers. So whoever pulls this off does not win with the American people. The American people hate this kind of stuff. And what's interesting is they hated it even in the past when they liked the objective. If you remember back in 2013, Obamacare back then was unpopular. So you'd think, well, maybe they would like that. No, they didn't like the shutdown. They didn't like the means. Earlier this year, most Americans favor some relief for the Dreamers. They favored that end, but they still didn't like the shutdown. Here, most Americans don't want the wall, so they're upset about the objective. That doesn't even justify it, and they're upset by the means. But I do have to go back to something that Hugo said about foreign policy, if I could for a second. I don't think that's been a success for the president. I think in Saudi Arabia, he has now been rebuked very strongly by the Saudis and by the Senate in favor of the Saudis. I think they're suspicious of his Russia policy. North Korea is not going anywhere. The president doesn't have the attention span, the skills to have a really big win in foreign policy. Basically, he fights with our allies, which doesn't look so good. So the normal thing, Nixon going to China during Watergate, I don't think he has available. I don't think he has a place that he can go and win a big one and put people's concerns at ease.
I would jump in just to say, clearly the murder of the Saudi journalist Khashoggi and the response and the fact that the administration, the kingdom is blamed for that and indeed was responsible for it is a black eye for the policy. But I think that a lot of people would say the support of Israel, the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, the bringing in of the Saudis to support essentially American foreign policy against Iran in the Middle East. The overtures to North Korea, which admittedly I think that the administration is now realizing are not going nearly as smoothly as they had wanted. But nevertheless, I think there was support for the overtures to try and do something about a problem which has existed for several decades. So I would say that on foreign policy, I would dispute with you that the extent to which this is regarded as a success.
Well, and his impact on foreign policy is ultimately negative because he's so unpredictable. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. Eugene Scott, back to the wall, which nobody wants. If you look at the polls and you sort of garner the American interest in this, they also don't like shutdowns. And Trump has taken ownership, saying, I'm going to shut down the government if I have. How do Republicans try and bring this together? Because apparently the president wants all that money for the wall.
Well, I think Republican lawmakers understand that at the end of the day, when it comes to the wall, the president is going to do what he wants to do ultimately, even though many Americans, including Republicans, especially Republicans along the border, have made up in their mind that this is not something that they've wanted, and they've made that clear to their lawmakers with the hope that their lawmakers could persuade the president from doing things differently. But they can't, in part because the president made this promise on day one that this was something that he was going to do. And he's running his entire re-election campaign based on the slogan, promises kept. And so he has to lean into this, especially considering the number of things in other areas that have not gone as well for him. I think what's going to be really interesting is to see how voters in particular respond to the president as his original promise regarding the wall increasingly changes. People forget that he promised them on day one that Mexico would pay for the wall, and there's nothing being discussed right now and no policy in place that makes it clear that Mexico will in fact pay for the wall. But if it does happen, it will be American taxpayers and many of them who voted for Trump themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, Hugo.
They won't be paying.
Hugo, let me go back to you for a second here. And this is something that I've never really understood, and I'm not sure exactly where you've been on this issue. But the wall has never really been popular, even among a lot of fiscal conservatives. A lot of people, even in the House and the Senate, Republicans, like, come on, we understand it was a great line in your campaign pledges, but it's not worth the money, and actually there's better technology. So doesn't that make it even more difficult for a lot of Republicans to support a government shutdown based on a political promise of Donald Trump's that was always unpopular with at least 60% of Americans?
Well, sure, they don't want to shut down, and they don't want to shut down over this. But to say that the wall is unpopular is, I think, somewhat misleading. President Trump, or Donald Trump as then was elected partly on the promise and that of building the wall. That was the central, or perhaps the core promise of his campaign. So I think one of the odd things about the whole dispute on the wall is that $5 billion is a kind of, it's almost a rounding error in the federal budget. Every time we go through immigration at an airport, we're going to a wall, and we're, you know, that it's not an unusual thing for people to face a wall when they come to a border. There's nothing immoral about a border wall, and there's nothing that stops people from coming through in a legal way. I think a lot of people understand that, and they don't think that there's something extraordinary or immoral, as the Democrats have said. A lot of people think that President Trump is obsessed with the wall, and perhaps he is. But I think also the Democrats are obsessed with the wall. The reason is they don't want to give the president a win. And as the reporter was just saying now, it's one of his campaign promises. He's campaigning on promises kept. He wants this, and both Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi want to make sure he doesn't get it.
Well, Jennifer, I don't think the wall is immoral. I just think it's stupid. And and if you look at poll numbers from 2016 forward, it has been unpopular. Right now, a poll this week shows that 69% of Americans do not think the wall should be a priority. 28% of Americans do believe the wall should be a priority, which is pretty consistent with polls that were taken in 2016. People voted for Donald Trump for a lot of reasons. I would suggest that building a wall was not, even though that was his applause line, I don't think that's why a lot of Americans voted for him if you look at the poll numbers.
I think that's right, Joe. Listen, I think the American people recoil from this idea of a wall. As a practical matter, it makes very little sense. It puts us at odds with Mexico, whose cooperation we actually need, diverts resources, and frankly, it sometimes makes for more illegal aliens because those who are casual travelers back and forth in across the barrier get caught in the United States. But I think this is absolutely critical. The Republicans are operating in their own little world here on this and on so many other issues. What is popular with the base, 80–90% of them, is very unpopular with America. Whether you look at climate change, whether you look at the wall, whether you look at a whole slew of issues, Republicans are kind of in their own little world. And so Donald Trump, who goes out and loves the applause of the crowd, goes out to red states and gets a lot of applause for these things, says the people are with us. Well, the people are the entire United States. He may not have governed that way, but that's the reality. And now he has a Democratic Congress, and he has a Senate that's really kind of all over the map. So he's not going to get this. And Donald Trump, his entire life, has gotten through with salesmanship and never really having to deliver. Now he's caught. Now there's no bankruptcy. He can run out of town as he did with the casinos. He can't simply close down, you know, the vodka or the steak line. He's got to sit there and deal with the fact he has not delivered. So I think he is caught. I don't think he particularly has a game plan, and he's just waiting for Congress to figure out how to get him out of this.
Well, and again, Mika, you know, I say the wall is not immoral. The wall is stupid because, I mean, the wall may have been a great idea for the Chinese thousands of years ago, but for America in 2018, if we're really talking about stemming the flow of illegal immigration in the future to this country, we've got technology and even the president's, once again, the president's own cabinet, the president's own chief of staff, the president's own director of Homeland Security said that there are more effective ways to keep illegal immigrants out of this country.
Jennifer Rubin, Hugo Gurdon, thank you both for being on the show. And John Meacham, thank you as well for being the soul of America.
No, he
and
is the soul.
still ahead on Morning Joe. If Bob Mueller doesn't ruin President Trump's re-election chances, the state of Pennsylvania might. Politico says a GOP meltdown there threatens to torpedo Trump's hopes for a second term. We'll talk to Republican Ryan Costello, who is retiring from Congress in that state after 2 terms. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.